And for more on this, so we're now being joined by Alex Treman from Jerusalem. Alex is the CEO and at the Jerusalem Bureau Chief of Jewish News Syndicate. Thank you so much for joining us on WION, Treman.
Thank you.
Mr. Treman, my first question to you is that why has Israel taken so long to agree to these conditions which were put forth earlier as well? What has changed this time?
I don't think it was Israel that waited so long for this formulation to come. Obviously, from the first moment, Hamas took the hostages to get to a moment like this, but Hamas was making demands, and this truce was actually supposed to go into effect yesterday, and yesterday we received word that it was Hamas that was continuing to up its demands and delay the implementation of the truce.
Mr. Treman, these demands of the prisoner swap and the hostage release were put forth on the table earlier as well, but Netanyahu has now agreed. Why is that?
Well, Netanyahu is under significant pressure from the families of those who were taken hostage to do whatever it takes to bring them home, even if they enter into a deal which is seemingly unfair, which is seemingly dangerous, both to the hostages that aren't released, as well as to the IDF soldiers that are now in Gaza and don't have the opportunity to shoot if they're it's a dangerous situation. Also releasing known terrorists, arrested terrorists back into Israeli society is a dangerous situation. But this is the price that the Israeli government is willing to pay to get back its innocent civilians that were brutally kidnapped on October 7th.
Mr. Treman, experts also believe that this 4-day truce might well be extended. How do you see that reading? Because one of the major components of the truce between Israel and Hamas militants is that it allows a further 1-day pause in fighting for every additional batch of hostages released. And as you said, the Netanyahu is under pressure from the relatives of the hostages taken by Hamas militants. So how do you see this panning out?
Well, first of all, we have to see if the truce holds. Only 15 minutes ago, rockets from Gaza were fired already after the 7 a.m. Deadline for the truce to begin. But there is a formula in place that after the 4 days, if Hamas produces the 50 captives that it is supposed to produce, that there's a formula to extend the truce 1 day for each 10 hostages that are released, up to a total truce period of 10 days. So I think the burden of proof is really going to be on Hamas to see if they have the hostages under their control, that they are alive and that they're prepared to release them. If they are, then there will be additional days of quiet.
You speak of how the burden of this truce is on Hamas, but I also want to ask you a question on how do you think Israel at the moment will be able to strike a balance in hostage release and destroying Hamas, which it clearly has said that that's its ultimate aim, because Israel has clearly said that they will continue attacking the Hamas militants and continuing its airstrikes in Gaza after the truce, after the ceasefire.
The defense minister yesterday said that he expects fighting to go on for at least another 2 months and that the IDF is prepared to strike and to strike hard the moment the truce is over. In fact, the IDF actually sought to take advantage of the pause in the fighting in order to redeploy troops into more advantageous positions, particularly as the fighting, which has been limited to the north of Gaza, will now shift to the south.
Mr. Treman, you speak of how Hamas has made it clear that they will increase the fighting on all the fronts. Do you think that this ceasefire will help Hamas regroup and intensify its attacks?
This is definitely the fear, and one of the issues that was brought up in the deliberations inside Israel about whether to accept the terms of the agreement is that Hamas was very much on the ropes here, and the IDF had been moving forward with speed and force through Gaza, and Hamas desperately needed the opportunity to regroup. It will be a chance for them to also to redeploy, to move their positions, and also to recoup some of the weapons which may have been isolated in certain positions, and to collect them and gather them for the next round of fighting. So yes, it actually puts IDF troops in much greater danger that Hamas will be able to regroup and rearm, but the IDF is confident that it's strong enough to handle those threats.
Right, Mr. Raymond, it was Gallant who clearly said that the war will continue for the next 2 months after the ceasefire, but also help us understand if there is any kind of knowledge of how the hostages will be determined or prioritized to be sent back.
So women and children and also elderly women are the only ones that are expected to be released during this period. And right now, the IDF has received the list of the first 13 hostages that are expected to be released at 4 p.m. today. We'll see if they're delivered according to the schedule. And then an additional list will be prepared 24 hours in advance of the next release.
Right, Mr. Raymond, also talk to us about how U.S. State Department officials called the truce a hopeful moment, but said that the administration would work to secure the release of all hostages in the coming weeks. Seems like there is still doubt over the smooth exchange of the hostages.
Absolutely. Israel's been warning about the psychological terror of Hamas and that they do expect surprises. I think that the entire Israeli society is sitting on the edge of their seat, not ready to depend that Hamas will maintain its word and deliver the 50 hostages. There's been all kind of rumors swirling and different reports that maybe some of the hostages that they intend to deliver are not alive, which would be a violation of the terms of the deal. And in addition to the 50 that are supposed to be delivered as part of this deal, were 240 hostages taken. So the fate of these other hostages is seemingly unknown. So it could be that they have 50 that they can deliver. Maybe the only reason they've agreed to 50 is because they don't have any more that they can deliver, and we don't yet have any information as to the status of the other remaining hostages.
Also, Mr. Raymond, if you can take us through the identification process, we're learning that the Red Cross will escort them, the hostages, to the Rafah border crossing and hand them over to the Israeli military. How will the procedure take place going forward?
Yeah, I think there's still questions about the Red Cross's involvement, but what's supposed to happen is the hostages will be taken to the Rafah border crossing, which is the border between Gaza and Egypt. And Israel has set up like a mini field hospital to immediately accept and collect the hostages and to do a very superficial medical examination. There are 6 hospitals in Israel which have been prepared to accept the hostages with special wards and accommodations already set up, and the hostages will then be transported to the hospital on the basis of the need and which hospital they think is the most appropriate. There they'll be able to meet up with family members for the first time and get significant medical examination and assistance if they need it.
Mr. Raymond, apart from the hostages being released from Gaza, 39 Palestinian prisoners will also be released from Israel as a part of the swap on the 4-day truce between Israel and Hamas militants. On what basis will these Palestinian prisoners be released? Shed some light on that.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, as part of the deal, Israel's agreed to release on a ratio of 3 to 1 prisoners that are sitting in prison in Israel for committing acts of terror. You're talking about individuals that are minors under the age of 19, which means it includes many 17, 18, and 19-year-old males that were committing acts of terror, arrested in the act of attempted murder, as well as women that were arrested in the act of attempted murder. And they will be simply released back to the societies in which they were from. There was one case of a woman who tried to stab a neighbor, and she's going to go back home to the house where she lived prior, right next door to the neighbor that she attempted to stab.
But Mr. Trainman, we're also learning that the truce has begun, the ceasefire has begun, that there will be no fighting, but Israeli troops will remain stationed at their positions across the Gaza Strip. Tell us more on that.
Right. Again, there's questions as to whether the truce will hold. There was already rockets fired 15 minutes after the truce was scheduled to begin at Israeli towns. It's not uncommon for Hamas to do that in cases where some kind of ceasefire has been agreed. Many times the rocket fire continues after the period, and it's just a symbol of strength that Hamas tries to inflict. Yes, the IDF will maintain positions in Gaza, which means that the threat of continued fighting is ready and apparent. The IDF is under instructions not to fire unless fired upon. But if the IDF is fired upon, it will return fire. It will seek not to increase the fighting, only to return fire in those specific locations to protect themselves and their positions. But this isn't a permanent ceasefire. This is a temporary halt in the fighting in order to allow for the return of the hostages. So the international community is hoping that this pause in the fighting will last. Nobody in Israel thinks that this temporary pause is going to lead to a full-fledged ceasefire.
Mr. Truman, you speak of how this ceasefire, this truce will not last, because you speak of how there have been airstrikes from the Hamas side towards Israel.
Well, I think that the reason why it's not going to last is because the IDF has said it will not stop fighting until all of its hostages are returned and until Hamas is no longer a military and governing power inside of Gaza. And neither of those goals will be accomplished at the end of the 4-day period. And even if this period extends to 10 days and Hamas returns, let's say, up to 80 hostages, as it is said that it may do, that would still leave close to 200 hostages inside Gaza Strip, and Hamas still in power. So the IDF is vowing to continue the assault until those goals are met.
Mr. Truman, you speak of how the ceasefire will not last, but if you can think of this scenario in which a ceasefire could last, because one of the components of the truce clearly highlights how for the 1-day pause in fighting for every additional batch of hostages released, a total of 10. So in that scenario, the ceasefire could pretty much last for more than 4 days.
It could be extended according to the truce deal that was signed by Israel and Hamas. The deal could extend up to a total of 10 days. And if it extends for each day of the extension, day 5 through 10, a day of quiet will be met by the release of 10 hostages. So if Hamas will release an additional 10 hostages, they'll buy an additional day of quiet. But there's a maximum period on this current deal that it goes for 10 days, and anything else would have to be agreed upon by the two sides.
Right, Mr. Truman, thanks very much for being here with us on WION and sharing your insights with us.
Thank you.